Hello and welcome to Latika Takes, a podcast with me, Latika Berg. Hello, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for listening. I'm Latika Berg, your host, and this week I'm in Prague. As regular listeners know, what a treat to go back to my favourite European city. All right, so I have been attending the International Institute for Strategic Studies Prague Defence Summit. It was addressed by NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, a really interesting speech. And at the opening dinner, the Foreign Minister of the Czech Republic, or Czechia as they like to have rebranded themselves, amongst some controversy for the sake of this interview, what shall we say, not appeased, I'll say I was accommodating and went along with the Czechia rebrand. I digress. Jan Lipavský, the Foreign Minister of the Czech Republic, or Czechia as they have proudly rebranded it, was the guest speaker and gave a fascinating speech, actually, one of the best I've seen him give, and I've known him for a couple of years now. And regular readers of my Substack at www.latikambirk.com will know that I have interviewed him several times. So it's been really interesting to see his own journey in the job. Now, Czechia is heading to elections very soon, and it does look like they will be overtaken by the populist sweep that is shaping Europe and the Western world. So I sat down with Jan Lipavský for what may be our final interview between myself and he in this role, at least. We spoke about a lot of things, including the Czech Republic's outlier position on Israel. They're still staunch allies of Israel, and you will hear his defence and some striking comments about whether Israel should continue in Gaza or not right now. We also speak, of course, about China and mostly about the war in Ukraine. And this is where I began our conversation. I started by asking Jan Lipavský if he felt that the prospect of peace was now closer than before.
I'm skeptic in terms of speaking about peace in Ukraine. For half a year, there's a ceasefire offer by Vladimir Zelensky. He, at that time in March, accepted what Donald Trump was proposed. Let's freeze the conflict, have a ceasefire. And till that time, we see for 6 months just prolongation by Vladimir Putin. Everyday attacks. So this is the reality. Every day there is a war, and in spite of all of the negotiations, those were low-level negotiations led by Russian figure Benitsky, but we also witnessed it, Alaska summit, and now we hear that Russia won't stop, that there is no preparation of the meeting between Zelensky and Putin. So I don't think that we are getting closer. But on the other side, we have to be ready for a ceasefire and peace. And that means that for Czechia, that we are part of the coalition of the willing, that we are looking at all the possible options how to support and more support Ukraine now in terms of war and, let's say, military supplies, but also in the times of possible ceasefire and peace. So we have to be ready, and it's our strength, those are our sanctions and support to Ukraine, which will make Russia to realize that there must be some kind of ceasefire and peace.
I think implicit in your skepticism about achieving peace in Ukraine is therefore a lack of confidence that the Trump administration can bring Putin to the table and deliver peace. Are you skeptical about what the US can achieve?
I would not say that it's Europe or the US. It has to be all of us together. And in this regard, I think it's important that we keep open dialogue between Europe and the United States of America, that we keep NATO together. We know that we don't have a same view, that we don't have a similar approach, but to keep this dialogue open and to have America on board, it's absolutely necessary. And you know what was the situation in January, February. We saw how Zelensky was treated for the first time in White House. And that led, by the way, to the creation of the coalition of the willing, the realization that Europe must do more and to really be able to provide some force into the overall situation, which I welcome. I think it's important that we continue with that. So we need to do it together. I think that's the only way how to go forward. And I really would not like to see America be, for example, completely out of the loop.
Do you fear that?
you could describe it as a field if such a scenario should happen. And for me, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, it's something which leads me to the dialogue.
Do you think it was a mistake for Donald Trump to have hosted Vladimir Putin in America in such a way, offering him a red carpet?
I have not joined the ranks of the critics of that meeting. I understand why it happened in such a format. If my maybe personal opinion, if such a meeting was supposed to happen, there was no other way rather than such two equal leaders meeting. It was not even constructed like a bilateral reception by one side or the other. It would have a different scenario. It was really constructed as a summit of two leaders, even though it happened on the American soil. So for me, I understand that Donald Trump wanted to speak personally with Vladimir Putin, that he wanted to check what is the reality, maybe in his regard. And for me, for European minister, it's important that before and after, there was very close communication between Europe and the American side. And basically, even for us, for Czechs, we were part of the loop. We knew what will happen, and we now know what had happened. So for me, this was, let's say, absolutely acceptable and okay.
What will Czechia provide in the coalition of the willing?
So there's a part we cannot speak about because this touch the military planning, but we are part of that military planning, and all those scenarios are connected to the ceasefire situation or a peace deal situation. And there is a component what we can do now and what we are doing now. So I will start with the later one. So first of all, we are, let's say, a very important provider of weapon systems and ammunition. Czech Ammunition Initiative provided 1.5 million ammunition rounds this year. Last year it was 1.5 million pieces, large caliber ammunition. And it's not the end of the year. And I'm pretty sure, or I believe, and I hope that we will be able to overcome the number from year 2024. We are now calling for donors to start making contracts for 2026 because Ukraine needs constant delivery of ammunition. Also, we want to create such a condition in the EU, in NATO, that collectively we will be able to support Ukraine because it's a strong Ukraine army, which is the strongest security guarantee for Ukraine. I think this is the claim which we now may hear very often. And this is very important. Strong Ukraine army is a very important term because if you look at the conditions which are Russians putting on Ukraine or possible negotiations, they want to limit the size and the strength of the Ukraine army, basically, because their goal is to strip the Ukraine statehood. So army is absolutely precondition for any kind of the step, and we should not allow that. So this is our role currently, and in the future, we are looking for more ways how to help Ukrainians to be stronger and safer.
Does that include Czechia forces, though?
In times of peace or ceasefire, we are not absolutely excluding that, but it's connected to the post-war situation.
What does it say to you that countries who are not in Europe, not in NATO, and here I would raise the flag for Australia, are considering some sort of military involvement to preserve peace in your continent? And you have countries like Italy and Poland that are not willing to do that themselves.
So this is a very complicated discussion, which is always connected to domestic debates. So I don't want to judge any country. I don't want to, let's say, criticize any country for respective decisions, even on a discussion on sending troops. For example, Poland, they bear the brunt of all the delivery supplies. Most of that goes through Poland because of the border, and they have the military expenditure, which are now the highest in NATO. So every country needs to find its proper role, and very often those are speculative discussions because we are not in a situation. We don't have a ceasefire. We don't have a peace deal, so we don't know the exact conditions under which such a decision would be made. So even in Czechia, it would be the decision of the parliament. It's not a government decision. So it might be our opinion if we want to do something or not. I think it's responsible that we are part of the military planning, so we will be included from the very beginning to the constructions of those plans, and we will have a deep knowledge what are the possible capabilities of ours let's say, for example, in training different kind of units. So once the moment comes, we really can say, okay, this is the situation. But on the other side, there is no point in doing it too much in advance as a public debate if we do not have all the information.
I think one of the problems with Europe, though, is the question of credibility. And it's come up over and over again. And I think there are some very valid complaints from the Americans about Europeans willing to enforce their own security. And if it comes to a point where there's too many European partners who are not willing to put their own skin in the game when it comes to preserving peace on your continent, why should other countries then believe that we should have a stake in doing that?
So I think the credibility is doing what we are really doing now. And that's massive military support to Ukraine. And not only military support, it's macro-financial support. So the state is not failing as such because of the economy is strangled. It's the humanitarian development aid discussion on reconstruction of Ukraine. And basically combined Ukraine effort and our effort, Russia is not able to achieve any significant progress. Even they are now struggling with their own economy because of our sanctions. So this is the credibility we have. And speaking of sending units, I would not go too far unless we know what are the conditions. So situation may change and the final decisions will be done once the ceasefire or peace deal is there. So I really don't see any point of saying you should do that or not. It's more practical discussion, what are our capabilities. But you are right in a sense that Europe still must do more, and those are the discussions. We are looking for new resources, and we will increase our military expenditures collectively, and that will allow us to have those resources.
What is the point of giving Ukraine an Article 5-like security guarantee backed by Europe and the United States and not just NATO, which is what they actually want?
So it's very simple. There is no agreement in NATO. If the United States of America says that they will not agree now, there is no way how to go around that.
Do you support Ukraine? Does Czechia support Ukraine in NATO?
I wish that one day Ukraine will be in NATO, yes.
When?
That's undefined, but one day, let's say.
Are the Americans wrong to deny Ukraine's membership?
I will. If you allow me, I would describe the other way how to provide the security guarantee, and then we may we may slide back to the rightness or wrongness of some political position. Ukraine territorial integrity was guaranteed in 1994 by Budapest Memorandum. And it was the UK, United States of America, and Russia, Russian Federation, which says, okay, Ukraine, please give up your nuclear weapons. And it was quite a significant nuclear arsenal. It was quite big. The Soviet legacy was huge. And we will protect your sovereignty and territorial integrity. And 3 members of UN Security Council, 3 nuclear powers provided that guarantee to the other possible nuclear power, which gave up those weapons. And Russia broke its word. Russia broke its promise. And it's the broken promise of the nuclear superpower, permanent member of UN Security Council, which we now try to fix in a sense that, okay, you broke the word once. Why we should believe you next time you promise something? So those security guarantees need to reflect that. And I already said that the strongest security guarantee for Ukraine is a strong Ukraine army, which makes sure that Russia will not again start with other aggression. And even in NATO, Article 4 and Article 5 counts with the strength of the respective members and the others helping them. And there is no defined way how such a help should look like. So basically, under the Article 5 similar approach could be counted possible military deliveries or the cooperation and things which basically happens now. But maybe we can imagine to have it condensed into some kind of, maybe not even treaty, but way that the Ukraine will have those guarantees and those will be stronger. And if it's America right or wrong, it reflects the reality of the American politics. And I believe that once there will be peace, that position might easily change because it will be in our favor to have such a strong army on our side.
But the fundamental premise, which the Americans reject, at least this administration, and President Trump is on the record saying this, is that he believes it's a provocation to take NATO so close to Russia's borders. Now, obviously, Finland and Sweden have joined and doubled NATO's border, and it didn't lead to any retaliation. So it's obviously something particularly unique about Ukraine. Do you think that attitude is going to change? Because the Democrats didn't hold that dissimilar a view either.
So the safest borders of Russia are with NATO countries. There are no wars. On the other borders, you have many wars. Russia has many wars. But with NATO, those are the safest borders. So I would not see it as a provocation. And the same way I described the broken promise of Budapest Memorandum 1994, that was the reason why Sweden and Finland stopped belief in a concept of neutrality and joined NATO. Because they saw that the neutrality is not protecting them from possible Russian aggression, invasion.
Joe Biden was on the record before the end of his presidency saying that Ukraine was essentially still too corrupt to join NATO. Is that the real truth that no one says out loud?
There is a corruption in Ukraine. I think this is something we should be able to describe openly. There is a immense set of measures to combat corruption. And some of those measures were as a condition, for example, to loan by IMF. Some of those conditions were included in other measures. And the best measure to fight against Ukraine is now in the EU enlargement process, because there is a huge package of measures. So if we continue with the EU enlargement, which is sadly now being blocked by Hungary, this is the safest way how to implement measures, corruption in Ukraine. So there's no point, let's say, to be naive and say that this issue doesn't exist. On the other side, the country is waging a war against aggressor. So the situation is not easy, but I see the EU enlargement as the best cure for that. And I would say it's, for example, valid for Czechia. When we had to enter the EU, we also had to implement many measures on rule of law. And this is, let's say, some kind of healthy pressure. On the other side, I would not connect it to NATO as such. NATO is a military organization, and we should be looking at the maybe NATO standards. Of course, Ukraine army, even in a wartime, is able to get in closer. And now we are getting into even situation when we will be studying how the Ukrainians are fighting the current war. So really, we should be clever about that.
Well, the strongest European army is in Ukraine. Do you think the Hague summit delivered permanent safety to NATO, or do you think it's a temporary reprieve and actually Europe does need to prepare for a long-term withdrawal of the United States from NATO?
So Hague summit was very important. We agreed on new goals for military spending, and it's a big thing.
I know. The first time I interviewed you in India, you were not even at your 2% goal, and now you're going to get to, what is it?
So we have fulfilled 2% last year as a Czechia, and this year we will do so, and we will next year increasing slowly to the 3-4-5%. So the Hague summit was success. There was a lot of fear, let's say, preceding the Hague summit. Will the NATO hold together? What will or will not President Trump do? But the result is good. And we have quite a simple agreement that Russia is a threat to us and that we have to work on that.
What about the next generation, and particularly Republicans in the United States, but even just the overall shifts in the world that we see towards security alliances? Do you think that NATO is something even in 10 more years you can look up and say, yeah, I think the Americans are still on board with us?
There is a clear message from many previous American governments which says Europe do more, be on your own, so we can together face all the challenges across the world. And implicitly this says we will focus on China, we will pivot to Asia. Trump is not the first one, but Europe didn't want to hear that, because it means that Europe will have to pay more for the military expenditure. So now we are living that. We are now in that situation. I foresee that even in the future generation, we will go shoulder to shoulder, to say so. But Europe will be a stronger partner in that situation. But we will face challenges. We will face challenges because autocracies and totalitarian regimes are joining, and they will be looking for their geopolitical power.
You said in a speech earlier this week that Europe is not ready yet to defend itself. When will Europe be ready to defend itself if it has to?
So this was a mere description of the situation of reality versus plans, and those plans are being designed by generals, army officers in cooperation in NATO. So they see practically what are our capabilities in anti-air defense, what are our capabilities on ground in different kind of heavy brigade and many other things in Navy. So we now need to ramp up our military production. We need to fill our stockpiles with different kind of ammunition. This is a huge and very costly endeavor, but we have to do it. And we have many obstacles. So even 3 years of Russian war against Ukraine and generally Europe, we are still not where we should be. And I'm happy with my country, but we need to ramp up the effort across whole Europe.
And when can you be ready, do you think?
I don't have any specific term in my mind, but I give you an example of Czechia. So now we spend 2% of GDP on defense. We need to reach the goal 3.5%, and the realistic scenario is to increase 0.2% every year. So 1.5% will take at least 5 to 6 years to start spending what needs to be spent. And those big projects like F-35, so Leopard tanks, anti-air defense systems, and many others, those are projects for 5 to 7 years to fulfill.
And how are you paying for your defence spending increases? Because this is a challenge for every single government that is now under pressure to raise defence spending. How do you balance the competing needs in your budget? Are you going to look at extra taxes, or do you have the public on board for how you're currently planning to increase your defence spending?
So just for the record, we have 1 month till the parliamentary election, so I have to be extra careful with any kind of answer because it's also part of the political discussion here. Partly it is a consolidation of finance, so let's say that we are looking for ways how to spend less on certain agendas. In terms of Czechia, it's direct donations and dotations to different subjects, which were extraordinarily high. So this is one of the possible sources. I don't want to speak about taxes much. I think it's more important that if there is economic growth, that the overall budget situation will be better. So now we have some kind of solution for the year 2026. The budget will be pretty soon presented. And yes, it is a major challenge. But we say, look, what is the point of sending money into all the nice and necessary things if we are not able to provide security for us? And it is not only about the hard security, it's also about the perceived security, for example, by the foreign investors and traders. If they start feeling that this part of Europe is not safe, it will cost us much, much more.
And do you think the public is on board with this? I mean, your government looks like it is not going to win the election next month. Has this been a part of why it might be losing support?
So the campaign is ongoing and things are not decided still yet, and there's a lot of undecided voters. So let's say that we focus on explaining our policy. And our policy is to provide security and prosperity to Czechia through the way I basically just described. Maybe it will come up to the situation that the public will say, okay, we want to have a different way how things are handled. But my job as a Minister of Foreign Affairs and the politician is to sell it. So yes, there is a polarization in society. There is a split. But I believe in this responsible policy and therefore I'm fighting for it.
Is populism a national security challenge?
So, populism is a politological phenomenon when someone says he speaks for the people and he will fight the system. So, I would not connect it to national security as such. I would say that many populists or most of the populists now are, for example, running Russian lines and propaganda, and that, for example, could be considered as a national security threat. And the populism as a phenomenon as such, I would not put it in the same basket.
So let's look back on some of the things you have or haven't done in your term. The chair of your Foreign Affairs Committee asked you to declare the Chinese ambassador persona non grata because it was reported that the Chinese tried to orchestrate a car crash when the Taiwanese, I think it was the deputy, was here. Why didn't you act more strongly?
We did act in a way that we communicated certain things to Chinese, and that basically solved the case at the time. And yes, I was asked to do certain things, but we acted to protect our interest and the security in Czechia.
But what was protecting your interest in allowing the Chinese to operate this way? I mean, that is dangerous, the behavior they were attempting.
We were quite clear with them that things like that are absolutely unacceptable.
And are you confident that they would not try this on your soil again?
I cannot predict future, but I would expect that the message was clear.
And so what are the merits of not declaring the ambassador persona non grata?
So I think we need to keep our relations with China straightforward and not too deep into the spiral of acts. So at that specific event, we were quite direct, we communicated, and we can continue, let's say, in the spirit of keeping the Vienna Convention on diplomatic relationship, to be respected mutually.
It's just a bit funny because I think when I come to this part of Europe, I often hear some of the loudest voices saying these exact same things about the way Western Europe has appeased Russia. Aren't you making the same mistake with China?
Absolutely not. So I give you another example. It was just recently discovered that the Chinese-sponsored group hacked into the system of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We were able to track it, stop it, and then publicly attribute it with the help of the EU and NATO countries. We said, okay, this is not acceptable, and we delivered our message. So we are protecting our security, our interests. We act accordingly.
Can I ask you about your Middle East policy? Because Czechia seems to be an outlier amongst the rest of Europe, where there is a growing feeling, and it's not just Europe, it's across the Western world, and particularly in a lot of Israel's closest friends, where they've now come to the point where they've said, enough is enough. We are actually going to recognize Palestine because we want you to stop bombing Gaza. Is that Czechia's view?
Recognizing Palestine will not stop war in Gaza. Recognizing Palestine definitely will not help Hamas to leave and return the bodies, living, all that, of hostages. So let's say that Czechia is not on board with that policy. We have a very strong relationship with Israel. It's something which goes many decades back, and let's say that this is a reality. It doesn't say that we are not aware or critical of many events which are happening in the Middle East. Speaking of Gaza, we are regularly pointing at the humanitarian situation, which I would call grave, and we are doing it on the multilateral forums, we are doing it in a bilateral relationship.
Do you think it's time for Israel to stop in Gaza? Is it time for a ceasefire or not?
I think it's time for Hamas to leave Gaza, and it's time to continue with that ceasefire plan, which ends in the third phase with some new governance for Gaza, so the hostilities could end.
So Israel can and should continue until Hamas leaves Gaza. Is that your view, that they have a right to do so?
They have a right to do so. Of course, they have to do it in a way that will hurt the least the population. I think this is what we all observe and that we are all concerned with.
I mean, this is really interesting because that is actually a view that is not widely held anymore in Europe. Why is Czechia so strongly still standing by Israel's side?
As I already described, not only tradition, but I think this is the real solution for the situation in the Middle East. Israel is waging war with many actors, Hezbollah, Iran, Houthis, and of course with Hamas, not with Palestinian people, with Hamas in Gaza. So I wish for the peace process, which is being facilitated by Egypt, Saudi Arabia and Americans to finalize. Yes, I would wish for ceasefire idea, and the Hamas has to end its existence in Gaza.
You've now been foreign minister for several years. You're facing an election. You might not be the foreign minister in another month or two's time. It'll be very sad for us.
This is the reality of political cycles. So this is not something which we should be sad about. This is the democracy, right?
You are a very strong realist, Jan. This is true. I wonder what you would like to identify as your biggest achievement as foreign minister. And what's the biggest unfinished business you have if you were successful and you continued on this job after the election?
So I see my mission as a part of the broader policy, what the government of Prime Minister Fiala was trying to achieve and to bring us into the core of European Union policy making. And we were able to achieve it through the security topics like support to Ukraine on building European defense, or, for example, topic of sanctions, which was very important for me. I created and successfully passed through Parliament the Czech national sanction law, and we have our national sanction list, which is not empty, and we have some quite interesting subjects there.
But even then, you've got Russian assets in Czechia, which you haven't seized yourself.
We have freezed them.
But you're actually advocating for Europe to take the assets, not just seize them.
Yes. And
why don't you start and do it in Czechia?
This needs to happen internationally. That's something which is clear, and all the possible national measures could hurt quite a lot. But if we are doing it together, that's the way those assets could also fall under that. I don't want to speculate on specific assets, actually. So, and those are not only topic of defense, for example, topic of fighting irregular migration, competitiveness, which equal to some necessary changes to the Green Deal policies. Those are topics where the Czechia is now in the core of European policy making. We are being perceived as an equal partner. So that I would call my biggest achievement. It was the topic of security for me personally, which I was pushing forward through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I also was able to secure outreach to quite broader world than to Europe. I visited India, I visited Australia, Japan, South Korea, Brazil, Argentina, some African countries. So let's say that this kind of diversification and speaking to the world was also a very important part of my policy. It connects to the economic diplomacy, and the present Czechia is a modern, developed, beautiful country. That was the third goal. And I think this is where we go to the unfinished business. We need more of our positive PR of our country.
Well, I'm happy to keep coming back. Jan Lipavský, good luck with the elections, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Latika Takes with me, Latika Burke. You can find my work at latikambirk.com and this podcast where you find all your podcasts. See you next time.